Madeleine McCann. Madeleine McCann was born in May 2003 in Leicester, England, to Kate and Gerry McCann. Both Kate and Gerry were Roman Catholic doctors who met in Glasgow in 1993 and married 5 years later in 1998. It wasn't until about 5 years after their marriage that they welcomed Madeleine, followed by twins Sean and Amelie in February 2005. Together, the three children formed a close-knit family unit, often traveling across Europe on vacations and exploring new places. Kate and Gerry would later describe their family of 5 as the perfect nuclear family. Madeleine's parents described her as a vibrant and lively child with a naturally outgoing personality. She took on the role of leader among her younger siblings and peers, showcasing impressive social skills and engaging warmly with anyone who paid attention to her. Her openness often blossomed into a unique sense of humor, the kind only a bright and innocent child could create. Her ability to express herself, tap into her imagination, and communicate her feelings was exceptional. Madeleine's bursts of energy fueled imaginative play and storytelling with friends, helping her build strong connections with other children. However, Madeleine's boundless energy often left her parents exhausted, as she constantly sought attention from everyone around her. Her early years were marked by challenges as much as joys. Kate and Gerry recalled that the first 6 months of Madeleine's life were especially tough due to colic, which caused her to cry for nearly 18 hours a day. They said they had to carry her almost constantly to soothe her. Colic is a well-known condition in infants that causes severe abdominal pain and intestinal discomfort. After the birth of the twins, Madeleine's cries intensified into screams. Her parents described how she would often run around restlessly while Kate focused on caring for the newborns. This high-energy behavior, which would later be seen in all the McCann siblings, never diminished the deep love and happiness shared within the family. Before I continue, I want to remind you that only a small percentage of people who watch my videos are actually subscribed. So if you enjoy my content, consider subscribing. It's free and you can always change your mind later. Now, let's move on with the video. Friends and relatives echoed these feelings, emphasizing the strong bond and joy that defined the McCann household. They all witnessed firsthand Madeleine's brilliance and social inclinations while also noticing her protective nature towards her two siblings, often mobbing them when their parents were out. In fact, some associates of the McCanns believe Madeleine and her siblings' camaraderie stopped at the presence of secluded strangers or an unknown group of people. However, because she knew how to engage even in foreign situations, relatives believed Madeleine could get along with anyone if she was given the time. These careful observations and infinite effects of joy surrounded Madeleine all the way up until a vacation she and her family took to Praia da Luz in the Algarve region of Portugal. Settling in a well-known tourist town for British holidaymakers, the McCann family quickly linked up with fellow doctors and assorted friends also vacationing in the area starting on Saturday, April 2007. Kate, Gerry, Madeleine and the twin youngsters were having a wonderful time on one of their many frequent trips, and all the good times seemed destined for picture books. That is until the night of May 2007, barely a week before Madeleine's 4th birthday. Kate and Gerry went out for dinner only to return to their flat and find missing their resilient and radiant daughter because sometime between 8:30 and 10 p.m., Madeleine McCann disappeared without a trace, leaving a void in the hearts of not just her family but in the hearts of people around the world. Launching an exhaustive search that would soon evolve into the most discussed missing persons tragedy of the 21st century. On April 2007, the McCann family travels to Praia da Luz, Portugal for a 7-day spring break getaway. The 1,000-person village is nicknamed Little Britain for the vast amount of UK travelers staying in the area. The McCanns retreat to 5A Rua Drive, Agostinho de Silva, a flat owned by a retired teacher from Liverpool. Throughout the next week, the McCann family dines with 7 other friends and 5 fellow children. The adults known as the Tapas 7 consisted of Fiona and David Payne, Diane Webster, Jane Tanner, Russell O'Brien and Matthew and Rachel Oldfield. All of the men worked together over the years and their respective families all got along wonderfully. On day 6 of the vacation, May 2007, Madeleine and her twin siblings hang out at the Ocean Club's Kids Club at the Praia da Luz Resort, while her parents go for a walk at around 10 a.m. During breakfast, Madeline asks her parents, "Why didn't you come when Sean and I cried last night?" An hour and a half later at 12:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry pick their children up from the kids' club and have lunch back at 5 a.m. before setting off for the swimming pool. At 2:29 p.m. that afternoon, Kate Micken snaps the last photograph taken of her daughter at the resort's poolside with the sun shining and Madeline smiling per usual. Between 3:30 and 5:30 p.m., Madeline and her siblings return to the kids' club and eat dinner together. At approximately 6 p.m., Kate brings her children back to 5 a.m. while Jerry attends a tennis lesson elsewhere at the resort. Around 6:30 p.m., Jerry sends Tapa's 7-member David Payne back to the apartments to check on his wife and 3 children. When the tennis lesson ends at 7 p.m., Jerry returns to 5 a.m. and helps Kate put Madeline, Sean and Amelie to bed. Their bedroom is fastened next to the front door of the flat, and has a single window overlooking the car park and public street. The shutter is closed before the children fall asleep. Between 7:30 p.m. and 8:30 p.m., Kate and Jerry clean up from the day's activities and share a bottle of wine together before heading off to dinner. At around 8:35 p.m., the Micken couple is the first of the friend group to arrive at the resort's Tapas restaurant, located just 160 feet away from the A5 apartment. They reserve a table overlooking their living quarters where the top of 5A could be seen. The resort staff leave a message in writing that the reservation is specific because the families have children sleeping back at the complex. 20 minutes pass by and a few more members of the Tapas 7 arrive at the restaurant at 8:55 p.m. As the friends begin their orders, Matt Oldfield quickly returns to the apartment complex to check on his flat and alert the Payne family that everyone else is waiting on them. 10 minutes later at 9:05 p.m., Jerry heads back to 5A to check on his own children. He walks through the unlocked back patio doors to avoid using the locked front door and potentially awakening the sleeping youngsters like they had been doing all week. Everything inside seems normal until he finds the children's bedroom door to be open about 45 degrees instead of just ajar. Suspicious, Jerry peers his head in but finds all 3 siblings fast asleep and accounted for. He closes the door back at 5 degrees, uses the toilet and departs. This is the last confirmed sighting of Madeline Micken. A few minutes pass by and Jerry stops to speak with a friend and fellow holidaymaker, Jeremy Wilkins, at 9:08 p.m. on the road near the Tapas restaurant. Throughout the next hour or so, members of the Tapas 7 swap turns going back to their apartment complex and checking in on their respective children. At 9:10 p.m., Jane Tanner walks up the road to a flat and passes by Jerry and Jeremy Wilkins without their notice. On her way, she sees a man walking across the path ahead of her, carrying a sleeping young girl wearing pink pajamas in his arms. It's a peculiar sight but not uncommon to a resort with many families. Tana finds her daughter safe in her room and returns to the restaurant. A little later at 9:30 p.m., Kate gets up to check in on 5A once more, but fellow Tapas 7 friend, Matt Oldfield, offers to do it instead while he keeps an eye on his own family. Kate agrees and Matt travels to the McCann's apartment. Inside, he finds the door to the children's room open again, but to him it means nothing. Instead, he pops his head in the door quickly and sees the twins sleeping in their respective cribs. From this vantage point, he doesn't explicitly notice Madeline and leaves the quiet building assuming all is perfectly normal. A half hour passes by and Kate makes another 5A check herself at 10 p.m. However, when she goes to push the children's door open, a draft of wind from inside the room slams the door shut. Kate enters with force and finds the window open and the shutter pulled up. The twins sleep soundly in their beds, but Madeline is nowhere to be found. Minutes later, Rachel Oldfield rushes to find fellow Tapas 7 member Jane Tanner in her apartment and relays the news of missing Madeline. Jane immediately calls back to her sighting and explains, "Oh my God, I saw a man carrying a girl." Matthew Oldfield then travels to the 24-hour reception desk at the bottom of the resort's hill to alert them of the disappearance. An alarm is raised and police are called at 10:15 p.m. 15 minutes pass before the local authorities arrive at Flat 5A. Along with the police, Around 60 staff members and assorted guests search the grounds for Madeline, an exhaustive hunt that lasts until 4:30 the following morning. At 11:10 p.m., special investigators from the police judiciary venture to the scene and discover the sliding glass door that was found open by Kate McCann has a lock. Both Kate and Jerry are unsure if they actually locked it at the beginning of the vacation. While resort employees unveil that the cleaning staff will often open the sliding windows to air out department interiors, the special investigators are unable to confirm if this was the case. By the early morning hours of 2 a.m., patrol dogs are called in to keep an eye on the search efforts. 6 hours later at 8 a.m., four rescue dogs arrive to sniff the area around the resort and attempt to catch a trail of Madeline at 5 a.m. Beyond. At 10 a.m., the local police finally set up roadblocks to monitor traffic both coming and leaving the resort and surrounding routes. Over the next 24 hours, up to 20 strangers outside of the main investigators and family members interact with the 5A apartment, later proving to taint much of the evidence and cause headaches for future forensic work. In the coming days, police began interviewing anyone and everyone associated with the resort or simply living in the area. Kate and Jerry rented a nearby home to stay close to the ongoing investigation. Over the next 11 to 12 years, despite efforts from Portuguese police, Scotland Yard, McCann Associates, private investigators, and public supporters, no solid lead has emerged in the search for Madeleine McCann. After flawed DNA results and sensational tabloid coverage, the case took on a unique place in the world of missing person tragedies. Madeleine's disappearance had such a profound impact that many in the UK and those close to the case divide time into before Madeleine vanished and after Madeleine vanished. Regardless of the cultural significance or the importance placed on this case compared to others, one truth remains: until she is found, all theories, evidence, and tips must be thoroughly explored until Madeleine returns home or her fate is fully understood. There are still critical points in the investigation that require close examination. From the start, investigators recognized how challenging it would be to identify suspects, referred to by the Portuguese as arguidos, because the disappearance took place in a bustling tourist area filled with locals and strangers passing through every day. The timing, during the busy late spring vacation season, meant there were countless faces both familiar and new, making the initial suspect list overwhelming. In other words, anyone could be guilty, but everyone was also innocent, a frustrating catch-22. Fortunately, police received a timely break when Jane Tanner came forward early with her unusual account from the evening of May 3rd. Her sighting of a man carrying a young girl away from the McCann's apartment complex would become the focal point of the early investigation and remain as the major case point in the eyes of the public following for almost 6 years. However, its importance isn't grounded by what it unveiled to authorities, rather grounded by what it distracted authorities from considering it took out more than a decade of the precious moments spent looking for Madeleine. Dubbed the Tanner sighting, Jane Tanner's testimony gave the first possible timeline of Madeleine's suspected abduction. As mentioned previously, Jane had traveled from the Tapas restaurant back to her flat to check in on her children at around 9:10 p.m. She walked down the road, passed by Jerry McCann as he spoke with a fellow vacationer and headed into the complex. Both Jerry and a second man would later say they couldn't remember seeing Jane walk by them that evening, and due to the confines of the narrow street, police initially believed Jane to be fabricating the entire ordeal. Yet Jane stuck by her following claims and highlighted that while Jerry and the vacationer didn't confirm her movements, they couldn't deny them either. A few minutes of walking later, and Jane witnesses an older man with what appears to be a toddler in his arms. She says he was crossing the junction of Francisco Gentle Martins and Rua Drive, Agostinho de Silva, moving east and away from the corner of 5A where the McCann children's bedroom was located. His direction was first determined as suspicious as he was supposedly walking in the direction of Robert Murat's residence, a 34-year-old Portuguese suspect early on in the hunt. Jane Tanner described the unidentified man as a white male standing at about 5 feet 7 inches with dark hair and complexion that would indicate European or Mediterranean descent. He seemed to be 35 to 40 years old from a distance, wearing beige pants, a dark jacket, and the demeanor of a local. The girl he was carrying was wearing pink and floral pajamas cuffed at the legs, much like Madeline was wearing. These descriptions were curiously withheld from the media until May, 3 weeks after the disappearance. A few months later, in October 2007, money from a fund set up by the McCann family was used for a forensic artist to recreate a simulated sketching of the Tanner sighting. The result is now one of the most famous images associated with Madeline's case. Sadly, the intensive search for the man from the Tanner sighting turned out to be a 6-year red herring chase. In October of 2013, Scotland Yard finally identified a British holidaymaker who matched the TS description and fully cooperated with police. He explained that he was indeed carrying his own daughter after picking her up from the Ocean Club and heading back to their flat. To prove his innocence, the identified man dressed up in the same clothes as was mentioned in the TS report, and visually matched to the specific profile detailed in the sketch. The man was also able to provide the clothes his daughter was wearing the night of the sighting as well, and once again, the alibi cleared when the unveiled pajamas bore likeliness to Madeline's Eeyore set but was in fact different. What frustrated authorities the most were the Tanner sighting wasn't the lack of information it provided, but rather the time it took away from other potential pieces of evidence and eyewitness testimony that would later prove vital. First off, the Tanner sighting led investigators to believe the main abduction took place between 9 and 9:15 p.m., which they based their impending reports on. However, after learning the Tanner sighting had little to no connection, they had to retrace their steps and recalibrate more than half a decade's worth of thinking. Thus, Scotland Yard turned their attention to another eerily similar sighting from the night of May 2007. This incident reported by Irish holidaymakers Martin and Mary Smith. The Smiths claimed that they saw a man carrying another child at about 10 p.m. in a location which was about 460 meters away from the McCanns in 5A. The Smith sighting man was walking away from the Ocean Club and nearing the beach at Rua 25 Dabril. The Smiths described the new figure as a male standing at about 5 feet 8 inches with shorter brown hair and a slim build. He seemed to be in his mid-30s from the Smiths' vantage point, and wore beige shorts, much like how Jane Tannen described the man in her sighting as not a tourist. The Smiths offered the same testament, going as far as to say the man seemed uncomfortable carrying the child. The girl he was carrying had blonde hair, pale skin, bare feet, and was wearing lighter-colored pajamas, again like what Madeline was wearing. E-fit images were initially created back in February 2008 when the testimony was first recorded, but the entire sighting was muddied when Martin Smith thought Jerry McCann fit the profile of the Smith sighting man. Oakley International private investigators were quick to strike down the possibility since Jerry had been confirmed at the Tapas restaurant at 10 p.m. But the rumored confusion created sensitive press about the Smith sighting. It wasn't until February that it reverted law enforcement's attention and reset the timeline to the abduction happening just before the Smith sighting. While the Tanner sighting ended in lost time, it's sadly a common thread found in many missing persons cases and criminal investigations overall, where a lead seems revolutionary yet can take years only to find it was a dead end. Regardless of results, the sightings are also proof of just how vast the spiderweb of possibilities is with Madeline's disappearance, and the preceding searches, and how one simple memory or visual can spawn thousands of theories that send everyone involved spinning in circles. One of the early theories cultivated by Portuguese investigators actually considered Kate and Jerry McCann as suspects. The base of the claim was built by supposed DNA evidence found by cadaver dogs inside the family's rental car after Madeline's disappearance, as well as DNA matching hers discovered behind the couch in the 5A apartment. This led police to draft a 10-page conclusionary report including wild ideas regarding a likely murder of Madeline, a cover-up fake abduction that involved the Tapas 7 as conspirators to mislead police, and even a claim that the number of suitcases each member of the party brought to Portugal was suspicious in nature. Realistically, none of the theories made sense or had conclusive evidence to back it up. The DNA found in the car and in the flat were tested using flimsy DNA methods, and it was stated in the forensic reports that despite the matches to Madeline's DNA, the sample sizes were simply too small to consider credible. Not to mention the hours upon hours spent questioning the McCann couple and their friends, who all cooperated fully and dedicated their testimony to truth and hope for Madeline's fate. In fact, Almost as soon as the disappearance was reported, Kate and Jerry set up a project called Madeline's Fund, Leaving No Stone Unturned Limited, which immediately caught fire across the UK and raised thousands of dollars to help hire private investigators and allocate resources directly to spreading awareness. Unfortunately, the early consideration of the McCann couple as arguidos fostered a tabloid firestorm that ended with lawsuits, defamation hearings, and unnecessary backlash that has turned a lot of the conversation around Madeline's disappearance to gossip and unsubstantiated finger-pointing. Because Kate and Jerry was soon relieved of suspicion after these reports were filed, they have since been 100% cleared by the current authorities. There is no reason to consider their involvement as a realistic or plausible hypothesis and will not be considered any further. Another early theory proposed by investigators was a burglary gone wrong. According to records, the time between February saw an unnatural rise in burglaries and burglary attempts in the area, including 2 around the McCann's apartment in the 17 days leading up to their vacation. These reports suggested that a burglary went into place the evening of May, of which Madeline interrupted after climbing out of bed and exiting her bedroom, hence why the doors opened further than Gary had left it. Then the burglar would have taken Madeline as a precaution, leaving through the bedroom window since it faced the street outside of the resort. In April of 2017, Scotland Yard announced a foiled burglary attempt was no longer under consideration. After they had interviewed potential thieves in the area and other potential suspects, but found no evidence. While the theory wasn't completely ruled out, their focus would turn to other ideas. A third theory positioned by investigators but quickly disregarded is that Madeline wandered out of her bedroom on her own accord and was taken by a passerby or fell into a construction zone nearby. These musings were first discounted by Kate McCann, who reminded police that Madeline would have had to open the patio doors on her own, close the blinds behind her, remember to shut the door again, operate the child-proof gate at the top of the stairs, and finally open and close the gate at the street level, all while being a 3-year-old toddler and unseen by resort members. It's also widely considered unlikely that Madeline climbed out of the bedroom window on her own. The prevailing theory among private investigators and law enforcement is that she was abducted, possibly in a planned operation. This belief arises from reports of suspicious individuals seen near the A5 apartment complex in the days before Madeline vanished, acting strangely or appearing to scout the area as part of a larger scheme. Over the years, police have been pursuing leads involving these suspicious men, known pedophiles, fake charity collectors, and criminals convicted of similar offenses who could be linked to the area in February. Ultimately, the massive media attention and expert commentary worldwide have flooded websites, editorials, and blogs with countless theories and conspiracies. Some crime scene experts who have examined Madeline's disappearance argue that the evidence does not support an abduction and instead suggests she was murdered. Critics of the police investigation describe much of the work as guesswork, pointing out that the A5 apartment was mishandled from the start. At least 20 people entered and exited the room on the day of the disappearance in May 2007 before it was officially sealed off, and forensic testing wasn't conducted for months. Meanwhile, other vacationers were allowed to stay in the apartment, further contaminating potential evidence. This mishandling coincided with ongoing conflicts between Portuguese authorities and UK investigators, creating high tensions as multiple law enforcement teams arrived in Portugal and complicated the search. Adding to the turmoil, tabloid interference and intense media scrutiny of the McCann family distorted public opinion and made it harder for authorities to carry out their work smoothly amid constant pressure and suspicion. With a vast amount of possibilities, no theory can accurately be concluded as the answer. Authorities have released tens of thousands of documents and translated almost every single one of them. They've investigated over 8,000 claimed sightings of Madeline and had counted in 2015 that they took almost 1,400 statements, collected over 1,000 exhibits, investigated 650 sex offenders and 60 persons of interest, not counting the next 4 years of research. As of today, Madeline's case has received A11,750,000 in funding, yet there are still so many unknowns associated with Madeline's vanishing, and until they are resolved and police release every document, report, and case file, we must wait for new leads to surface while doing our part in spreading awareness. But let's take a look at some of the suspects. One way we want to help divulge information is by sharing a list of suspects still wanted in the hunt for clues leading to Madeleine. Due to the sensitivity attributed to the case, and the unfortunate loss of time in the early years of the investigation, we won't be drawing our own hypothetical conclusion, instead highlighting critical police sketchings and efforts of people either acting suspiciously around the time of Madeleine's disappearance, or who have raised red flags in a variety of situations around Europe. Firstly, we have an unidentified woman whose profile was released on August 2009. The woman in question was seen near Port Olympic Marina in Barcelona, Spain on May 2007, just 72 hours after Madeleine disappeared. She appeared agitated, was nicely dressed but kept pacing up and down the street by Al Rey de la Gamba restaurant and bar. Two passing British men noticed the disturbed woman and decided to approach her. When one of the men who wishes to remain anonymous asked if everything was okay, the woman asked, "Are you here to deliver my new daughter?" No other details are known, but the British witnesses say that after their conversation, the woman had a colorful argument in Spanish with a local inside the neighboring pub. Again, no other details have surfaced except that the witness described the woman's accent to be of Australian qualities and appeared as an Australian Victoria Beckham lookalike. Next, we have an unidentified man who was spotted 3 different times by a fellow holidaymaker Gail Cooper who was in Praia del Uge on vacation from England. The first time she saw the man, he was walking in his lonesome under a heavy rainstorm along an abandoned beach on April 2007. Later the same day, the man with olive skin and shoulder-length hair knocked on Gail's door and pretended to be a charity collector, a popular con around the resort area during February. 2 days later on April, Gail saw the man for a final time hanging around a children's event sponsored by the Mark Werner Resort. Gail was called back to Portugal in February 2008 to work with the detectives on recreating the man's likeliness through 2 sketches. At first, the man was thought to be the same man whom Jane Tanner witnessed carrying a small child away from the apartments back on May. But when he was cleared, the long-haired man was confirmed as a separate individual. In 2010, private investigators released footage showing a man working near a white truck in inland Portugal. After reviewing the clips, Gail publicly identified the man as the same individual spotted at Praia de Luz beaches in February, despite differences like the absence of a mustache and lighter hair color. Similar witness accounts led to updated police sketches of these men. Other witnesses reported encounters with fake charity workers near the time Madeleine disappeared, providing descriptions that matched the sketches of these 2 men. Additionally, 2 fair-haired men were seen loitering near the McCann's flat in May and were believed to be of Scandinavian, German, or Dutch descent. Further EFIT profiles of suspicious men emerged from old Portuguese police reports and were later shared with the public, showing more individuals linked to the area. The Smith sighting produced 2 different EFITs of a man seen carrying a small child around 10 p.m. on the night of May 3rd. Another intriguing encounter prompted police sketches 3 days after Madeleine's disappearance, but these weren't revealed to the McCann family or the public until over a year later, when the eyewitness spoke with Mirror magazine. Anna Stam, then 41 years old, made a call to Dutch police when she thought Madeleine and an older Dutch couple walked in her Amsterdam shop on May 2007. According to Anna, the man was between 35 and 40 years old with a mustache, dark-skinned and spoke Portuguese. The woman he was with was a little older, maybe in her 40s with brown hair and spoke French. Accompanied with them was a little girl. The following are direct quotes from Anna in Mirror magazine who said, "I'll never forget the girl. She had her hair in a ponytail, huge green-brown eyes, a pale face which showed no emotion. I didn't like the man. He didn't look like a nice person. I work in a party shop so most people smile when they come in to buy things, but he didn't smile back at me when I smiled at him. He had no sparkle in his eyes. He was short with me and seemed angry. I got the feeling he didn't want me to interview with him and the others." The woman was also peculiar, acting stressed and uncomfortable, Anna said. "She tried to smile at me, but it was out of obligation, not from the heart. The whole way they reacted made a big impression on me." The man spoke in Portuguese. I know because I have Brazilian friends. The woman spoke in French while the little girl spoke English. It didn't seem like a real family. When the girl spoke, she allegedly mentioned my name is Maddie followed by she is not my mummy. They took me from my holiday. I later recalls thinking the woman told me she was in a station wagon, a larger car. Maybe they were going on a long journey because this woman spoke French. I immediately thought that they would go to Belgium or France. This would later connect the dots with early police theories that feared Madeleine had been taken by a Belgian pedophile gang, followed by 3 separate sightings of Madeleine lookalikes in Belgium after May because Anna wasn't 100% certain that there were any criminal acts associated with the encounter. She didn't report it to the police right away until a month later when she saw the Madeleine McCann case discussed on television. The Dutch police created EFIDs and sent it along to Portuguese police on June 2007. But the info never made it to the McCann family. So when Anne heard that over a year later in February, the McCann family had no knowledge of her testimony, she took it upon herself to connect with the current British law enforcement covering the case and cycled back through her memories. Thus, the sketches of the French woman and Portuguese mustached man were created, leaving Anna fearful her testimony came too late and the potential lead lost in translation. Probably the most disturbing police sketch is that of pockmarked man. The man in question was seen multiple times hanging around the McCann apartment by 3 separate witnesses, all in the time frame of the McCann's vacation. The first witness, a 12-year-old local girl who saw the pockmarked man outside the balcony of A5 at 8:15 a.m. on April 30th. In her own words, the girl said, "I was walking to the school bus stop. I go this way to school every day. I saw a man on the small path behind the block. He seemed to be looking at the balcony of the ground floor apartment. My grandparents used to live in that department, so I always look at it as I pass by." A few days later on May, the day before Madeleine disappeared, the girls saw the same man looking at the McCann's flat again around lunchtime. The second witness was a female British tourist who recorded the following. "I saw a man acting suspiciously on 2 occasions. The first time I saw him, I was walking along the road with my daughter. I grabbed my daughter's hand and pulled her towards me because for some reason the man unnerved me. The next time I saw him, he was standing on the opposite side of the apartment. He was watching it. I would describe him as very ugly with pitted skin with a large nose." The third witness, a man from Cheshire, was walking with his partner at 11:30 a.m. along the road by A5 but couldn't remember if it was May. He said, "I saw a man standing next to a wall. On the opposite side of the road was a white van. I paid particular attention to him because he appeared to be focused on watching the apartment block. As I walked past him, I looked at him and for a split second we had eye contact, but then he just carried on staring at the apartment." All 3 sightings have incredibly creepy backstories to them, and truly sends shivers down the spine when inspecting the man's sketch. If Madeleine's abduction was pre-planned, finding the figure who was seen multiple times by multiple people analyzing the McCann's living quarters could lead to valuable information. If the man in these testimonies or any of the presented drawings rings a bell at all, please speak up and say something. Even though it's been almost 12 years since that tragic night in Praia da Luz, we must remain diligent in our pursuit for Madeleine's captor or anyone who might be involved. We'd love to make detailed videos about every single possible suspect, but there are so many involved it pains us to leave out smaller players who could still have a big role. We recommend everyone who's interested in the case to research the other persons of interest, and we have provided some useful links in the description. Madeleine wasn't just a ray of sunshine, but also a child constantly absorbing knowledge with the potential to grow into a gifted and gracious human being. She was stripped of that opportunity, but the chance to rekindle her spirit isn't gone forever. There are still no signs or evidence suggesting that Madeleine is no longer alive, and until proof says otherwise, we must hold on to the belief that her heart continues to beat somewhere in the world. Whether she is in Europe or beyond, her spirit and will to survive remain undiminished by the passing years. Her lively soul and kind heart deserve our compassion, attention, and relentless commitment. This little girl, who loved to express herself, show affection for her family, and find beauty in life's innocence, needs our help. It would be a betrayal of our shared humanity if we didn't keep faith in the efforts to find Madeline or uncover direct evidence that reveals what happened to her. To stay informed on the case, visit findmadeline.com, where her parents regularly update blogs about their family's journey. If you or anyone you know has information about the case, you can fill out a contact form on the website, email, investigationfindmadeline@gmail.com, mail to investigationfindmadeline@gmail.com, or call the hotline at +44 8458 384 699. Moving on to the next case. Maria Munoz. Perhaps no one can ever truly grasp what unfolds behind the closed doors of another household. Yet one story emerged with such unexpected force and disturbing detail that it rattled even seasoned investigators. In the early morning hours of September 22, 2020, emergency services received a frantic call. A man, his voice trembling with panic, claimed he had found his wife, Maria Munoz, unresponsive and unable to wake. Paramedics rushed to the scene, but it was already too late. Maria was gone. And beneath what seemed to be the sudden collapse of a life, lay a far more sinister reality, layered and unsettling. What began as a fairy tale, Maria's life filled with professional success, love, and motherhood, took a dark turn. At some point, her husband began an affair but couldn't bring himself to let go of either relationship. Maria bore the weight of this betrayal for years, clinging to the hope that their family could be preserved for the children's sake. But in the end, her silent endurance led only to heartbreak, and ultimately, to a devastating end. Maria Abril Munoz was born on August 18, 1989, in the small southern town of Peñuelas, Puerto Rico. The youngest in a humble and close-knit family, she excelled in school and nurtured a lifelong dream of pursuing medicine, a path driven by her desire to save lives and care for others. After graduating, Maria enrolled in a prestigious medical university, determined to turn her ambition into reality. It was during her time there that she met Joel Pello, a young doctor nearing the end of his residency. Despite an age difference of nearly 11 years, the two formed a deep emotional connection that soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. They moved in together, and before long, Joel proposed. Maria accepted with joy. In February 2011, the couple relocated to the United States, choosing to settle in Laredo, Texas, a city near the Mexican border. Both found work at the same hospital, Maria as a nurse anesthetist, and Joel as a surgical assistant. They continued advancing their careers while earning a stable income, which allowed them to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, including a spacious home in a good neighborhood and 2 cars. In 2015, the couple had their first child, a boy named Alejandro. And in 2018, Maria gave birth to a daughter, Valentina. After the children were born, the young mother decided to temporarily leave her job and fully focus on raising the little ones and running the household. Nevertheless, she planned to return to work and renew her medical license once the kids got a bit older. Maria and Joel appeared to be a happy, harmonious couple. They loved each other, raised their children together, and their financial situation allowed them to live comfortably without having to restrict themselves. It seemed like they had no problems living their best lives. But behind the facade of an ideal family, a real drama was unfolding, one that most people close to them never suspected: the mysterious death of a young mother. In the early hours of September 22, 2020, an anxious man called emergency services, reporting that he had found his wife unconscious. He tried to revive her, but she showed no signs of life. The caller was Joel, and he urgently requested that a medical team be sent to his home as quickly as possible to try to save his beloved. Less than 10 minutes later, a patrol car and an ambulance arrived at the couple's house. The door was opened by a man dressed in blue surgical scrubs, which was already unusual. He simply shouted for the responders to follow him and rushed upstairs to the bedroom, where 31-year-old Maria lay on the floor. She wasn't breathing, and there was no detectable pulse, but her body was still warm. Joel claimed that he had performed continuous CPR and chest compressions for almost 20 minutes, but it hadn't worked. The paramedics also attempted to resuscitate her, but all their efforts were in vain. Maria was pronounced dead. When authorities asked Pello what he thought could have happened, he suggested that his wife might have taken a large dose of powerful medication, which could have been fatal. The paramedics immediately inquired if she had been dependent on any restricted substances, but Joel denied this, emphasizing that she had never dabbled in anything of that sort. However, he admitted that Maria had recently been struggling with severe depression and anxiety, and a doctor had prescribed her medication for it. Joel speculated that his wife might have accidentally taken more than the prescribed dose, leading to a tragic outcome. He quickly added that it was also possible Maria, in a state of deep distress and depression, chose to end her own life. He mentioned that she had brought up this topic in a conversation just the day before, but at the time, he hadn't taken her words seriously. The police asked Joel to show them the medication Maria had been taking. He went to the bathroom and returned with a nearly full bottle of pills. This struck the officers as odd since, in cases where someone ends their life by overdosing on medication, it's unusual for the pills to be neatly put away afterward. Yet, there were no empty bottles, blister packs, or any containers visible near the body or anywhere in the room. The bottle Joel presented was almost full, suggesting that if Maria had taken any pills, it was a very small amount. Such a dose was unlikely to be fatal, but nothing could be concluded with certainty just yet. To get answers, an autopsy and a toxicology report would be necessary to determine what was in her system at the time of death. While the paramedics attempted to revive Maria and the police examined the scene, 5-year-old Alejandro and 2-year-old Valentina were peacefully asleep in a nearby room, completely unaware of the tragedy unfolding just steps away. Joel mentioned that he had already contacted his relatives, who were prepared to take care of the children temporarily until everything could be sorted out. What was wrong with Joel? Despite all efforts, the medical team was unable to save the young woman and mother of 2. The real cause of her passing remained unknown, but in the meantime, the police needed to thoroughly interview the only person who had been present during the incident, the grieving widower, who immediately became the prime suspect in the case. Joel was taken to the station for questioning, and everyone who saw him that day noted his unusual and erratic behavior. Of course, it could have been attributed to shock and the pain of loss, but nearly everything about him seemed suspicious. From his appearance and clothing, to his words and gestures. For one, he was sweating profusely. So much so that his clothes were soaked through and clung to his body. Secondly, why was Joel wearing surgical scrubs in the middle of the night at home when he wasn't even scheduled for a shift? Thirdly, his movements were frantic and exaggerated as if he was on edge, constantly jumping up from his seat like a puppet on strings. His statements were scattered and inconsistent, further raising doubts. All of this led authorities to suspect that he might have been under the influence of substances that could cause excessive sweating and heightened nervous agitation. Moreover, Joel seemed unaware that he was fidgeting with something small and crinkly in his hand. It turned out to be packaging from a catheter needle, the kind typically used for injecting substances into smaller veins. When the officers asked him what he was holding, Joel casually replied that it was just trash. Another odd detail was that Joel discreetly took and hid the pill bottle prescribed to his wife, the same one he had earlier brought from the bathroom to show the police. When asked where the medication had gone, he feigned surprise and claimed he had no idea. However, the officers were equipped with body cameras, and one of them had recorded the moment when Joel quietly pocketed the bottle. When they showed him the footage, Joel appeared embarrassed and eventually handed over the medication, saying that he might have grabbed it unconsciously due to the shock. Joel then began to explain that he and his wife had been going through a rough patch, balancing on the edge of divorce. He admitted that they hadn't been living together for several months, but hardly anyone among their relatives, friends, or colleagues knew about it. According to him, this situation had developed due to Maria's mental health struggles and depressive state. He claimed that he frequently visited the house to stay connected with the children, whom he missed dearly, and that he was also trying to reconcile with Maria to save their marriage. The widower stated that on the evening before the tragic incident, he had come to see his family, spent time with the kids, and after they went to bed, he and Maria had a long conversation. According to him, they cleared the air, reconciled, and later were intimate. He claimed that afterward, he went to take a shower, and when he returned to the bedroom, he found Maria unconscious. At first, he thought she had fallen asleep, but when he realized she wasn't responding and had stopped breathing, he immediately called emergency services and began trying to revive her. He could not explain why he had been wearing surgical scrubs at home that night. The autopsy revealed no clear answers. There were no visible signs of injury or struggle on Maria's body. She had passed away shortly before the medics arrived as her body was still warm, but the entire situation and circumstances felt very peculiar. Initially, there were 3 possible explanations: a voluntary act, a tragic accident, or a deliberate crime, which could not yet be ruled out. Joel insisted that on that fateful night, he and his wife had been intimate about half an hour before the incident. But experts found no evidence on Maria's body to support this. So it seemed Joel had lied, but why? Perhaps he wanted to create the impression that they had reconciled and were planning to get back together, even though that might not have been the case. The autopsy revealed that Maria's stomach was completely empty, an odd detail that cast doubt on her husband Joel's account. According to him, she had taken medication while he was in the shower, which he claimed lasted no more than 10 minutes. He said he found her unresponsive afterward, attempted CPR, and called emergency services, but by then, Maria had already passed. Yet, no known medication could act so swiftly or fatally in a young, healthy woman without any prior symptoms. Despite the mystery, medical experts concluded with confidence that the cause of death was poisoning by an unidentified substance, resulting in severe intoxication, respiratory failure, and eventual paralysis of the heart. The medical examiner also noted a small puncture mark on the inner side of Maria's right arm, near the elbow, consistent with an injection using a very fine needle. However, the placement raised immediate suspicion. The site was in a location that would have been extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Maria to inject herself. This anomaly prompted a full toxicology report to determine the exact substance involved, a process that would take time. When investigators informed Joel of their intent to search the house and asked for his permission, his reaction was noticeably uneasy. He claimed that Maria was a very private and modest person who wouldn't have wanted anyone sifting through her belongings. He added that a search was unnecessary if she had simply chosen to take her own life. His discomfort, however, only raised more questions. However, the authorities disagreed, pointing out that the exact cause of death had not yet been determined, and therefore, all possibilities were being considered, including foul play. Additionally, they mentioned that a search warrant would be obtained soon anyway, so Joel could make things easier and faster by just giving his permission. Left with no other option, Joel reluctantly agreed, although he clearly tensed up. It seemed he had intended to return home after the questioning to tidy up and possibly hide any evidence, as he had already tried to do with the pill bottle. Notably, the decision was made not to let him leave until all circumstances were fully investigated. The peculiarities began almost immediately when the scene was inspected. Joel had claimed that everything happened while he was in the shower, but the shower stall was completely dry. There were no puddles, no steam, and no droplets on the walls. Moreover, there was no wet towel anywhere that Joel could have used to dry off. In addition, the medicine cabinet was located in the same room where Joel had supposedly been showering. This meant that Maria would have had to quietly take the medication, consume a fatal dose, and then return the bottle back to the shelf without Joel noticing, all while he was just a few feet away. This scenario seemed improbable, but according to Joel, that's exactly how it happened. In the bedroom, tucked behind the leg of the bed, a police officer found a small intravenous butterfly catheter, the kind used to administer medication into peripheral veins. It appeared to have been tossed there, as if someone hoped it wouldn't be discovered. This discovery immediately reminded investigators of the crinkly packaging Joel had been nervously fidgeting with. He must have put it in his pocket, and under stress at the station, started playing with it in his hands. But the most significant find in the house was Maria's personal diary, which she had diligently kept for several years, filling it with her thoughts, emotions, and struggles. This diary became one of the key pieces of evidence in this complicated case, the diary of a betrayed wife. The young woman wrote about her deep fear of losing her husband, her desire to keep their family intact, and her concerns that the unhealthy atmosphere at home could negatively impact Alejandro and Valentina. She adored her children, who were the center of her world, and expressed doubts about whether she could ever forgive Joel for the way he had treated her. The more closely investigators examined the pages of the diary, the more it became clear that Joel was at the heart of Maria's anxiety and depression. It turned out that Joel had started seeing another woman a couple of years ago, and he wasn't just hiding it from Maria. He was practically living a double life, unwilling to give up either his wife or his lover. This situation caused Maria unbearable emotional pain. She wanted to keep the family together, so she didn't push Joel away, hoping he would come to his senses and return to her and the kids. At one point, she realized she couldn't handle the situation on her own and sought help from a specialist who prescribed antidepressants. However, Maria hardly took them, fearing side effects and the risk of dependency. Maria wrote about her plans to end her maternity leave. She was preparing intensely to pass the necessary exams to renew her medical license and return to work as a nurse anesthetist. But would a woman who was actively planning her future suddenly choose to end her own life? In the last month, however, the tone of her diary entries noticeably shifted. Maria no longer wrote about how much she was suffering or her wish to win back her husband. Instead, she expressed that it was time to let go of the past and move forward for the sake of her children and herself. She reflected on her readiness to give Joel a divorce, to let him go, but she still wanted to maintain a warm relationship with him. A friend's account. Next door to the house where the tragedy occurred lived a woman named Adriana, who was close friends with Maria. When she heard the sound of emergency sirens late that night, she immediately felt something was wrong. The following morning, she saw several police cars outside and approached to ask what had happened. The news of her friend's sudden passing left her in shock, and she said she wanted to speak with the investigators because she had information to share. Adriana confirmed that Maria and Joel had been living separately for about 5 months, though he frequently visited to see his wife and kids. According to her, the family had once seemed happy. But around 2 years ago, things started to change dramatically for the 40-year-old Joel. He first lost a significant amount of weight and began hitting the gym regularly. Soon after, he bulked up quickly, suggesting to Adriana that he might have been using some enhancements. He also became more attentive to his appearance, changing his hairstyle and overhauling his wardrobe. As Joel's physical appearance transformed, so did his personality, but not for the better. Adriana described him as becoming arrogant, self-centered, and aggressive. She suspected he might have been using some kind of banned substances, but Maria avoided discussing this topic whenever it came up. These changes in Joel were evident on his social media accounts. Once a humble man, a devoted family guy, and a loving husband who shared photos of his loved ones, Joel now seemed preoccupied with self-admiration. He frequently posted revealing pictures that highlighted his muscular physique, often accompanied by suggestive captions, hinting that he was open to new connections. According to Adriana, the family's problems started when Maria was pregnant with their second child. Joel was often absent, seemed irritated by everything, and openly spoke about wanting more freedom, expressing how the domestic life felt stifling to him. Maria tried to be understanding, hoping that he would change after their baby was born, but soon she found out that Joel was seeing someone else. The other woman. It didn't take long to uncover the identity of Joel's new love interest. She was a young surgical nurse named Janet Aranda, who worked in the same hospital as Joel and was well acquainted with Maria. In February 2018, while Maria was at home caring for their newborn daughter, Joel had taken a vacation to Spain with Janet. Maria eventually discovered the affair, but still made an effort to salvage their marriage. This led to a love triangle that persisted for 2 years. Janet's statement. Janet came to the station to give her statement as soon as she was requested, remaining calm and cooperative throughout. She confirmed that she had been in a relationship with Joel Pello for a couple of years, and that he had been living with her for the past few months. From the beginning of their affair, Aranda knew that Joel was still legally married and had 2 children, and she was also personally acquainted with Maria. Despite the situation, Janet was unfazed, confident that Joel would eventually choose her over his wife. Janet stated that Joel never spoke poorly of his spouse, nor did he make any threats or hint at harming her. He only complained that Maria was refusing to grant him a divorce. She insisted that she had no direct communication with Maria and harbored no ill feelings towards her. On the night of the tragedy, Janet had a solid alibi. She was on shift at the hospital, which cleared her as a suspect. Toxicology report findings. It took nearly 4 months to receive the comprehensive toxicology report, but the results were quite startling. The analysis revealed a mix of 7 potent substances in high concentrations in Maria's system. Each one, in the quantities found, could have been fatal to an adult, meaning there was no chance for her to survive. The most compelling detail in the case was the nature of the substances found, drugs typically reserved for surgical procedures, used to induce anesthesia, create a medically induced coma, or manage severe pain. Joe, working as a surgical assistant, had direct access to these medications at the hospital. His medical training gave him intimate knowledge of their effects, including the exact dosage required to be fatal. While this strongly suggested intent and premeditation, it still amounted to circumstantial evidence, not sufficient by itself to formally charge him with a major crime. Nevertheless, the turning point came when Joel, the primary suspect who had remained at large throughout the investigation, was arrested that same day at Janet's residence. He did not resist. In fact, Joel remained eerily composed, but immediately invoked his right to legal counsel, as he was now officially facing charges tied to premeditated criminal conduct. With this new development, investigators turned their attention back to Janet, convinced she knew far more than she had originally disclosed. Initially, Janet refused to talk, silent and guarded. But that changed when she was offered a deal, full legal immunity in exchange for complete cooperation and an honest, detailed account of everything she had concealed. The stakes were high. If she declined and Joel's guilt was confirmed, she risked being charged as an accomplice. Janet's testimony. Janet accepted the deal and revealed that Joel had been using certain substances, which he would steal from work. He often brought these drugs to her place and injected himself, slipping into a state of euphoria afterward. The substances had effects similar to prohibited drugs, and she managed to list 5 of them that she could recall. Interestingly, all of these were found in the deadly cocktail present in Maria's system. Janet's testimony, combined with the toxicology results, was enough to move the case to trial, reconstructing the events of the fatal night. During her interview, Janet disclosed that on September 21, 2020, as Joel was preparing to visit his wife, he made a peculiar comment that Maria's future would depend on their conversation that evening. Joel had no interest in a divorce. He liked maintaining 2 households, where he was welcomed by 2 women, both afraid to lose him. Additionally, a divorce would mean splitting assets with Maria and paying significant child support. Investigators theorized that Joel and Maria talked, but she remained firm in her decision to end the marriage. That's when he might have tricked her into ingesting something. And when she began to feel unwell, he offered to help by giving her an injection, one that was intentionally lethal. He acted decisively, administering a dose several times higher than what would be fatal, then waited until she stopped breathing before calling emergency services. This scenario explained the lack of struggle on Maria's body and the absence of any signs of the intimate encounter Joel claimed had occurred. If he had administered the injection to her left arm, it could have been interpreted as a voluntary act. But Maria was right-handed and wouldn't have been able to insert a catheter in such an awkward position on her dominant arm. The trial and verdict. The trial against Joel Pello began in March 2023, 2.5 years after the tragic incident. It was a challenging case because the prosecution's arguments relied mainly on circumstantial evidence. Without Janet's testimony, Joel might have slipped through the cracks without facing legal consequences. Another crucial piece of evidence was Maria's personal diary, which clearly indicated that she had no intention of ending her life. Her entries revealed plans for the future and a strong resolve to keep moving forward. In an effort to cover his tracks, the suspect disposed of the syringe he used to prepare the fatal injection for his wife, but he overlooked what happened to the needle itself. This oversight was likely caused by his impaired state, as he appeared to be under the influence of substances that clouded his judgment. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the defendant admitted to injecting his wife but insisted he was only trying to calm her down because she was behaving irrationally. He maintained that she had taken an excessive amount of her prescribed medication, and that the injection only intensified its effects, but on its own, it wasn't the direct cause of her death. Despite the defense team's strongest efforts to prove his innocence, on March 30, 2023, 45-year-old Joel Pello was found guilty of first-degree premeditated criminal conduct and tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to life in prison, with parole eligibility only after serving at least 30 years. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with me. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps me bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like me to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.